Kyoto, Japan, October 8th, 1594. A pungent, suffocating smell of burning wood assails your nostrils, mingling with something else. Something metallic, sharp, that makes your stomach clench. It's the scent of fear hanging heavy in the air, causing the crowd to press closer, as if trying to merge into one, despite the chilling terror. You stand among them, shoulder to shoulder with merchants and peasants, samurai and servants, feeling their warmth, their tremor. You are all here, united in your morbid, almost indecent curiosity, unable to tear your gaze away. At the center of the execution ground, like a gaping maw of hell, stands an enormous iron cauldron, a black gullet devouring the light. Thick steam rises from its depths, writhing like ghostly fingers reaching for the cold autumn sky. You hear it, a low, insistent, wet sound, as if the earth itself is groaning. The oil inside the cauldron bubbles, its boiling seemingly seeping under your skin, settling deep within your bones. The executioner's assistants, with indifferent persistence, feed logs into the glowing maw beneath the cauldron. With each new log, the flames leap higher, casting wild, flickering shadows on the pale, frozen faces of the condemned. Two figures kneel directly before this infernal mouth, bound, immobilized, surrounded by guards. Your gaze latches onto one of them, a broad-shouldered man whose power is palpable even through his restraints. His dark hair is matted with sweat and grime, and his gaze, there's no plea in it, only defiance, frozen deep within his pupils. Beside him, tiny, almost invisible in the man's shadow, trembles the figure of a child, about 7 years old. His small body shakes not from the biting wind, but from such an all-consuming, icy terror that it seems to radiate from him, like heat from the boiling oil, scorching your very soul. The man is Ishikawa Goemon. The child is his son, and your heart clenches with foreboding. In moments, both will be lowered into that cauldron of death, and you will witness something that will haunt you until your dying day, a father's love, transformed simultaneously into salvation and damnation, a final act of defiance that will echo through centuries, permeating the very fabric of time. But to truly grasp this moment, your mind must retreat, back through the decades, into the shadows of a war-torn Japan, to a time where honor and survival danced on the edge of a blade, where every breath could be a last, and where legends were born from the ashes of a burning world. The year is 1558, and Japan is bleeding. The Sengoku period, an era of warring states, has turned the country into a boundless battlefield where rapacious warlords fight for every sliver of land, for limitless power, and for the elusive dream of unification. It is into this chaos, amidst the clang of steel and cries of despair, that you witness the birth of a child destined to become either the greatest thief in Japanese history or its most beloved folk hero, depending on whose eyes you view his fate through. His name, legends whisper, was originally Sonada Kuronoshin. Born into a samurai family that faithfully served the Mori clan in Iga province, he could have lived a life of honor and unwavering duty, following his lord's path and perhaps dying with a sword in hand on the battlefield. But fate, as is often the case with great individuals, had entirely different, far grander plans for him. Cold air clung to his skin. The 15-year-old boy stood, barely breathing, over the bodies. The wooden floors, creaking and familiar, now greedily absorbed dark, wet stains. It was blood, his father's blood, his mother's blood. A heavy, cloying scent of iron enveloped his throat, making his stomach clench. The Ashikaga shogunate's men came in the night, swift, ruthless. He heard their short, clipped commands, the dull thud of footsteps, and then only his mother's death rattle, cut off so abruptly. His father, Ishikawa Akashi, had been condemned to death. His crime, simply being on the wrong side, on a side that shifted like sand in a storm, claiming lives. The boy's hands trembled, a violent tremor, as he gripped the hilt of his father's katana. The metal was still warm, viscous with the blood of the killers. He felt the remnants of their lives clinging to his fingers. But they were gone. They had dissolved back into the darkness from which they came, leaving behind only corpses and the acrid stench of violence that seeped into the wood, into the air, into every cell of his being. The silence that followed their departure was deafening, heavy as a tombstone. In that moment, Sonada Kuronoshin died, and from that death, from that black void, something else was born, something harder, more malevolent, something dangerously alive. He became a student of Mimichi Sando, one of the Iga school's most formidable ninja masters. Here, in the mountain fortresses where mist clung to sharp peaks and shadows were living weapons, the boy mastered his art. He felt the rough grit of stone beneath his feet, the cold wind whistling in his ears, drowning out his own thoughts. He learned to wield the blade until it became an extension of his hand, an extension of his will. He heard only the hiss of steel slicing through the air and his own ragged exhale. He mastered the secrets of infiltration, becoming as silent as a falling leaf. He learned the deadly dance of assassination, transforming ordinary men into whispers in the night, into an unseen shadow that slipped past guards, through cracks, through the very fabric of the world. Every strike, every step, every breath was steeped in discipline and pain. He felt his body transform, becoming an instrument, sharp and lethal. But even in this world of discipline, pain, and death, his heart betrayed him. It beat faster when he first saw her, one of his master's concubines. Her name dissolved into the river of time, but her beauty must have been worth dying for. Her laughter was like the chime of bells in the wind, her skin like silk, her scent like the delicate blossoming of plum. He felt the touch of her fingers, light as a butterfly, and that touch burned hotter than any blow. They met in secret, under the cover of night, when only the rustling of leaves bore witness. Their whispers were almost inaudible, their breaths merging into one. But secrets in the ninja world do not live long. When Mimichi discovered their affair, the air around him turned cold as a sword blade. His voice was quiet, but each word fell like a stone. There could be only one answer: exile or death. The boy chose exile, but not before stealing something precious from his master, a sword of legendary craftsmanship. A blade that seemed to sing with its own inner light, even in darkness. He felt its weight in his hand, its coldness, its promise of power. It was a theft that would haunt him, a crime that branded him a nukenin, a rogue ninja, a man without honor or home. He heard only the pounding of his own heart, drowning out his footsteps, and the cold whistle of the wind that drove him away. And so, Sonada Kuronoshin vanished into the mists of history, dissolving into them like snow melting in the palm of a hand. And from that mist, from that formless void, Ishikawa Goemon emerged, a name that would soon become synonymous with both terror and hope, depending on whether you counted yourself among the rich or the poor. The Kansai region in the late 16th century was a place where wealth flowed like water to those who knew how to channel it. He saw it with his own eyes. He felt this injustice. While peasants barely made ends meet, their hands cracked from labor, and their clothes threadbare, smelling of earth and sweat. They lived on crumbs that fell to them from the nobility, and their hungry murmur was almost inaudible. The merchant class grew fat on trade, their silks rustling, and the jingle of their coins louder than the chirping of cicadas. Samurai lords hoarded treasures like dragons guarding gold, and the gleam of their armor blinded the eye. Buddhist temples became repositories of wealth that would make emperors weep with envy, their incense mingling with the scent of gold and old dust. It was a world where some lived in luxury, while others lived in destitution. And Goemon saw it, heard it, felt it. In a world where the very air seemed heavy with injustice and the gleam of gold blinded the eye, the night of 1580 embraced Osaka. It cloaked the city in a dense, impenetrable shroud. Stars barely flickered, like distant, indifferent eyes, and the mansion of a wealthy merchant, a massive structure of dark wood and tile, stood motionless, plunged into a deep, almost ominous silence. Only the faintest creak of floorboards could be heard beneath the guards' feet, their steps lazy, confident, almost monotonous, like those of men who had never known true threat, never felt the sharp, icy breath of danger on their necks. Inside, behind silk screens and heavy tapestries, the merchant slept. His breathing was even, deep, and each exhale carried the scent of expensive sandalwood. He was surrounded by soft, cool silk, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the gilded inlay of his bed. His dreams were filled with the jingle of coins, the rustle of expanding trade routes, and the quiet whisper of profit, sweeter than the finest sake. He heard nothing, not the softest steps that glided across the tiled roof, nor the rustle of a shadow that detached itself from the profound darkness of night, then, like liquid gloom, seeped through an unlocked window. The air in the room barely stirred. The merchant awoke only when a coldness, a sharp, penetrating coldness of metal. He felt it at his throat, and only then did he open his eyes wide. Before him was a gaze, heavy, bottomless, a gaze that seemed to have absorbed all the fury, all the pain, all the despair of thousands of dispossessed, hope-deprived souls. "Your money, or your life," a voice whispered. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but every sound in it vibrated with something more than a simple desire to steal. This was not robbery. This was redistribution. Each word resonated in the air like a hammer striking an anvil. This gold, it was earned by the sweat of farmers, by the toil of artisans. It will return to those who need it most. By dawn, the merchant's coffers were empty. Only the scent of old dust and the bitter taste of fear remained. But in the villages outside Osaka, at that same hour, mysterious gifts began to appear. A sack of rice, heavy and smelling of earth, silently settled on the doorstep of a widow whose hearth had long been cold. Silver coins, cold and ringing, landed in the hands of a lame beggar who had sought alms for years. Medicine, smelling of herbs and hope, appeared by the bedside of a sick child, paid for with gold clearly bearing the merchant's personal seal. Thus legends were born. Not in the grand, cold halls of power where the fates of empires were decided, but in quiet, almost unseen moments of kindness. In every rustle of a rice sack, in every jingle of a coin, in every sigh of relief, Ishikawa Goemon and his band of followers became phantoms of the night, shadows that preyed on the rich and powerful to redistribute their wealth to those who had nothing but empty hands and hungry eyes. The common people began to whisper his name. At first, it was just a faint whisper. Then it grew into a murmur, and then into something approaching reverence. Here, at last, was someone who understood their struggle, someone willing to risk everything to restore balance in a world that had tilted too far towards the powerful. Children grew up listening to stories of a noble thief who robbed the rich to give to the poor. And in their imaginations, Goemon became more than just a man. He was a force of nature, an unwavering champion of justice who emerged from the deepest darkness to bring light. But legends, as Goemon would discover, are dangerous things. Very dangerous. They carry not only whispers of admiration, but also the heavy, cold gaze of those who cling tightly to their injustice, who wish no crack to appear in the walls of their power. While Goemon, like a shadow, moved silently in the night, building his reputation from the echoes of others' fears and hopes, another man was rising, slowly, inexorably, in the full, blinding light of day. His name was Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Born in the dust of a peasant's hut, he clawed his way up from the very depths of society with blood-stained hands to become one of the most powerful men in all Japan. Where Goemon operated, lurking in shadows, using whispers and cunning, Hideyoshi unleashed the thunder of armies and the subtle, slippery tongue of diplomacy upon the world. Where Goemon sought to distribute wealth, scattering it like seeds, Hideyoshi greedily sought to accumulate it, gathering it into a tight, ringing fist. These two men were like mirror images, gazing at each other through the murky glass of fate. Both came from nothing, with empty hands, not a single coin in their pockets. Both forged their reputations with pure, white-hot willpower. Both commanded the loyalty of those who served them by the sheer force of their name alone. But their paths, so similar at the start, diverged, and this divergence would prove fatal, inevitable. Hideyoshi was the great unifier, a man whose iron hand he believed would put an end to the endless, bloody years of the Sengoku period, establishing a new, unbreakable order. After his lord, Oda Nobunaga, perished in 1582, Hideyoshi systematically, step by step, conquered or negotiated the submission of the endlessly warring daimyo. By the 1590s, he stood at the very pinnacle of power. He ruled Japan, which for the first time in generations knew the silence of peace, not the clang of steel. But peace, as Hideyoshi keenly understood, demanded more than just victory on the battlefield. It demanded the complete, ruthless elimination of all, absolutely all, sources of disorder, every challenge to his authority, even the quietest whisper. And in the deep, ominous shadows of his new order, like a festering, suppurating sore, Ishikawa Goemon represented everything he so desperately sought to crush: lawlessness, rebellion, that naive, romantic notion that an individual's conscience could, ever, triumph over the might of state power. The inevitable clash did not occur due to some grand, premeditated design. No, it happened due to a personal tragedy, sharp as a shard of glass, that transformed political adversaries into blood enemies. Goemon's wife, Otaki, a woman whose beauty, it was whispered, could rival that of the most exquisite court ladies, was captured by Hideyoshi's agents. Some whispered that she was killed for her husband's crimes, her flesh torn, her screams silenced in the night. Others claimed she died fighting to her last breath, trying to protect her young son from capture. Her final strength spent shielding him from those rough hands. The exact details of her death didn't matter. No. What mattered was the searing, all-consuming rage it ignited in Goemon's very heart. The man who had been content to quietly, like a shadow, steal from the rich and redistribute their jingling gold, now craved something far more fundamental, something that burned him from within. He craved vengeance. The white walls of Fushimi Castle gleamed like bone in the milky moonlight. It stood on a hill, a defiant challenge, its silhouette etched against the velvet night. September 1594, Kyoto. Inside, behind stone walls and countless layers of guards, slept the man whose name was whispered with reverence and fear. Toyotomi Hideyoshi. His peace, it seemed, was unassailable, but Goemon had honed the art of the impossible for decades. He knew every shadow, every rustle of wind in the bamboo, every creak of old floorboards beneath his feet. His body was a phantom, gliding through the labyrinth of corridors. The cold of the stone seeped through the thin fabric of his kimono, but he felt nothing. Only the tension in his muscles, a clenched fist, his focused breath. A breath barely audible. The training under Mimichi Sando had long become part of his flesh, his soul. Past the outer guards, whose gaze swept over empty space, through winding passages where the air smelled of dust and old wood, up staircases whose steps remembered 1,000 strides, but not this one, almost weightless. Each step brought him closer to the private chambers of the man who, with a single word, had reshaped Japan. The room was surprisingly simple. No opulence, no ostentatious luxury, just a futon on the tatami, and on it, Hideyoshi. His breathing was deep, even, almost lulling. For a moment, Goemon froze, his gaze sweeping over the sleeping face. This peasant who became a king, a man who, by force of his will, had unified fragmented lands. In sleep, he appeared almost innocent. Short in stature, with weather-beaten features, with sparse greying strands escaped from beneath his pillow, nothing in that calm countenance betrayed the iron will that had reshaped a nation, spilled rivers of blood, crushed enemies. Goemon's hand slowly reached for his belt. The blade, his faithful companion for many years. The stolen sword, its steel remembering hundreds of battles. He drew it from its scabbard, and the blade caught the moonlight filtering through the thin shoji paper. It flared, seeming to glow with its own inner fire. One swift strike, one, and the tyrant would be dead. Japan would breathe freely, casting off his yoke. And Otaki would be avenged. Her image, her suffering, her last words, all of it burned his mind, lending him strength. He raised the weapon, the weight of the blade in his hand, familiar, reassuring. He took the final, decisive step. His foot brushed something, an imperceptible movement, the edge of a small polished table. A bronze bell resting on it, likely for decoration or ceremony, toppled, fell. A dull, resonant thud on the wooden floor. A sound like thunder, deafening in the dead silence of the night. The effect was immediate, catastrophic. Hidden compartments in the walls sprang open. Guards. They burst into the room, their swords already drawn, steel singing as it left scabbards. The clang, the rustle of fabric. Heavy footsteps. Hideyoshi sat up sharply on his futon, his eyes wide open, but no longer bearing sleep. Only a sharp, penetrating gaze. He was already assessing the situation. Within seconds, Goemon was surrounded. the cold metal of a blade pressed against his throat, his own sword, his own weapon now held against him, and the man he could no longer kill looked directly at him. So, Hideyoshi's voice was surprisingly calm. Not a single note trembled, not a trace of fear, only a steady, predatory calm. The great Ishikawa Goemon has finally shown his face. I wondered when you would come for me. Goemon said nothing. His lungs constricted. The air felt thick and heavy. He had nothing to say. Failure. Complete. Absolute. He knew that failure meant death, but not just death. Something far, far worse. Something that would make death itself seem like a mercy. A cold dread pierced him to the bone. The cold of the stone seeped through the thin fabric of his kimono, rising from his feet. His hands, tightly bound with rough hemp rope, ached. But Goemon held his head high. He stood in the middle of Fushimi Castle's great hall, beneath arches where the very air seemed to hang heavy with unspoken expectations. Around him, in the dim light that thickened beneath the high ceilings, court officials and military commanders stood frozen. Their eyes, glinting in the dim light, were fixed on him, on every movement, every breath. This was no trial. It was a spectacle, a performance where the verdict had long been etched in stone. Hideyoshi's imperious figure, seated on his throne, seemed carved from black wood and gold. His gaze swept over Goemon, studying him with something that could almost be mistaken for admiration. In that gaze was the recognition of a worthy adversary, a man who had almost succeeded where countless others had fallen. The scent of expensive incense and old wood mingled with the acrid taste of tension hanging in the air. Ishikawa Goemon, Hideyoshi's voice, deep and authoritative, reverberated through the hall like a gong strike, making the air vibrate. You are accused of theft, banditry, and attempted assassination of the lawful ruler of Japan. How do you plead to these charges? The silence that followed these words was deafening. It pressed, enveloped, making breaths catch. But Goemon did not flinch. His gaze, direct and piercing, met Hideyoshi's. There was no plea in it, no fear, only steel and unyielding resolve. This was not a criminal begging for mercy, but a man who lived by his own laws and was ready to accept death for them. I am guilty of everything you have named. Goemon's words rang out clearly and strongly, cutting through the silence like a blade. Not a shadow of doubt, not a drop of regret. I stole from the rich to give to the poor. I defied the laws of those who would trample the weak. And yes, I attempted to kill you because you are a tyrant who has forgotten that power exists to serve the people, not to oppress them. The court erupted. A sharp intake of breath, as if hundreds of lungs simultaneously filled with air. A low, stunned murmur swept through the hall, the rustle of silk mingling with the faint clang of armor. No one dared speak to Hideyoshi like that. No one dared so openly defy his authority. But Goemon was not finished. If these are crimes, then I am proud to be a criminal. If defiance of injustice is treason, then I am glad to be a traitor. Do what you will with me, but know this, others will follow in my footsteps. The poor will always need protectors, and tyrants will always breed rebellion. Hideyoshi's face remained impassive, like a mask carved from stone. But those who knew him well, who could read the faintest signs, saw. Rage was building deep within his eyes, like a dark, churning maelstrom. This was more than mere defiance. It was a direct, undisguised challenge to everything he had built, everything he represented in this world. You speak of justice, Hideyoshi's voice became dangerously quiet, almost a whisper, yet each word pierced the air like an ice shard. But justice demands order, and order demands that those who break the law bear the consequences. You lived by violence, Ishikawa Goemon. Now you will die by it. The verdict. His words struck like an icy blade. They pierced the air, shattering the hall's deafening silence, and echoed deep within his chest. Death by boiling. Goemon felt the cold spread across his skin, seeping beneath his clothes, down to his very bones. This punishment, the old stones of the palace whispered, was meant for monsters, for those whose crimes transcended human comprehension. But Hideyoshi was not finished. A heavy, oppressive air hung in the hall. And since you claim to be a protector of the people, Hideyoshi's voice, once sharp, now acquired unbearably caustic, drawn-out notes. Let us see how much you truly love them. Your son will share your fate. He will die as you do, slowly and in agony, so that all who witness this understand the price of defiance against lawful order. The world around Goemon froze. The sound of his own name, uttered in connection with such a fate, drowned out everything. His son, an innocent boy who had done nothing but bear his name, now condemned to death for his crimes. The composure that had sustained him for so long cracked. It ran through his very soul, leaving behind a burning, unbearable pain. It was worse than any physical torture, burning him from within, twisting his insides, constricting his chest. The boy is innocent. A hoarse, unfamiliar voice tore from his throat. For the first time, he heard his own voice crack, breaking off mid-word. Kill me as you wish, but spare the child. He has done nothing to deserve this fate. Each word was torn from him, leaving a bitter taste of despair on his tongue. But Hideyoshi was unrelenting. His gaze, cold and empty, pierced Goemon through. This child is your child. He carries your blood, your name, your legacy of defiance. Japan will be better off without both of you. The words, sharp as razors, cut him to the quick, stripping away his last hope. The night before the execution, Goemon sat in his cell, holding his son close. The damp cold of the stone seeped through the thin fabric of his kimono, but the warmth of the small body in his embrace was the only thing that warmed him. The boy, about 7, didn't fully understand what was to happen, but he felt his father's anguish like a physical weight pressing down on him, on their shared silence. The scent of dust and staleness mingled with a faint child scent, so familiar, so fragile. Papa, the child whispered, his voice thin as a thread, yet piercing the silence. Are we going to die tomorrow? Goemon looked at his son, at that innocent face barely visible in the dim light, at his sleeping eyelashes. His boy, drawn into this deadly game between a father and the ruler of Japan. How to explain to a 7-year-old that he would die for sins he hadn't committed, for a rebellion he had never chosen to join? How to explain the pain that awaited? His throat constricted. Yes, Goemon finally managed to choke out. He had always believed in truth, even when it was terrible, when its taste was bitter as poison. We will die tomorrow. The boy was silent for a long time. His small body did not flinch. He seemed to digest this information with a strange, unsettling calm that children sometimes display in the face of incomprehensible catastrophe. Goemon heard only his even childish breathing and his own ragged, heavy breaths. Will it hurt? He asked, his voice just as quiet, but with a faint tremor. Goemon closed his eyes, trying to hold back the burning tears that welled in his throat. He felt all the muscles in his face tense. "Yes," he said again, each word an unbearable effort. "It will hurt. Will you be with me?" "Yes," Goemon promised, pulling his son closer, feeling the fragility of the small body pressed against his own. "I will be with you. I will hold you. I won't let go no matter what happens." His voice was muffled, almost a whisper, so as not to awaken dormant fears, to convince himself most of all. The boy nodded, his breathing even and soft, right beside him. In a child's mind, perhaps death is not so terrifying when a father is near, when his strong arms hold tight, promising to face the unknown together. Goemon spent the rest of the night feeling the cold of the stone floor through the thin fabric, by the light of a dim oil lamp, composing his final poem. Each word was a brushstroke of ink on rough rice paper, an imprint of his soul. A trembling hand traced the characters, the ink smelling sharp, mingling with the scent of dampness and hopelessness. It was an ancient tradition to leave a final statement of one's philosophy, a confession, a prophecy. When the last stroke was complete, he leaned back, looking at the lines that burned with his rage and defiance. "Though you boil the thief's body, his spirit you cannot boil." Thieves will always exist, as long as there are rich and poor. These words were not just a death rattle, it was a defiance. He felt his own fate pulsing within them, the fate of all the humiliated, all who dared to raise a hand against the immutable foundations of the world. He saw himself not merely as a man, but as part of something greater than himself, part of a force that could not be destroyed by fire, nor by boiling water, nor by the most terrible execution. The dawn of October 8th, 1594, arrived too quickly, yet stretched out impossibly slowly. The cold morning air pierced him, making him shiver. Nanzen-ji Temple in Kyoto was already abuzz. The execution ground was filling with spectators, their silhouettes darkening against the fading sky. Merchants, peasants, samurai in rigid armor, monks in coarse robes, all flocked here, drawn by a terrible, almost animalistic curiosity. The scent of smoke and damp earth mingled with the anticipation of something unprecedented. Death by boiling was reserved for the most heinous crimes, and most present had never witnessed such a thing. At the center of the cleared ground rose an enormous, monstrous iron cauldron. Its black surface gleamed dully, reflecting the first rays of the rising sun. From its depths rose plumes of steam, thick and oily. The air was filled with the sharp, nauseating stench of superheated oil. The fire beneath it had blazed since dawn, its crimson tongues licking the cauldron's black belly. The oil inside had already reached a temperature that would kill a man in mere moments, turning flesh into nothing. Goemon and his son were led out. Heavy chains clanked, their cold metal burning his wrists. The boy clung close, his small hand clutching his father's clothes tightly, almost painfully. The crowd pressed tighter, their voices, a low, guttural murmur of anticipation and dread, swelled, enveloping them. Goemon felt thousands of eyes fixed on them, their heavy, palpable weight. He looked up. High on a raised platform, with a full view of the proceedings, sat Hideyoshi. His face was impassive, as if carved from stone, not a single emotion flickering across it. He watched as the man who dared to attempt his life faced his final moments. A somber man, the executioner, slowly stepped forward. His heavy steps echoed dully on the cold stones of the plaza. He had done this before, many times, and his voice, when he began to speak, was dry and detached, like the creak of old machinery, without a single note of compassion. He explained the procedure. Words, honed by practice, fell from his lips. The condemned would be lowered feet first, slowly, so that every inch of the body would experience agony, so there would be no mercy, so there would be no swift end. Goemon heard every word, each one piercing his consciousness like an icy thorn. But he did not tremble. Only his grip on his son's small hand tightened, almost painfully. The boy looked up at him. Wide eyes were full of terror, but in their depths, through the veil of fear, shone an absolute, unwavering trust. Even now, with the world crumbling around him, he believed his father would protect him. Goemon bent down. The dry air rasped in his throat. He whispered, barely audibly, so only his son could hear, "Remember what I told you. I won't let go." The guards approached. Their heavy boots clattered on the stones, the clang of armor and chains deafeningly close. They reached for the boy, to lead him to his own chain, to his own cauldron. But in that instant, Goemon did something that would make the crowd gasp, that would be remembered for centuries. He gathered his last reserves of strength, lifted his son high above his head, desperately, convulsively, trying to keep him as far as possible from the boiling hell. The chains biting into his wrists made it almost impossible. Every movement was unbearable pain, but desperation imbued him with an incredible animalistic strength. His muscles strained to their limit, his shoulders burned, but he held on, held tight. The crowd below let out a single convulsive gasp. This was not how it was supposed to be. The condemned were supposed to submit, accept their fate with dignity or horror, but not resist. Not like this. But Goemon was not merely resisting, he was defying. "If you want our deaths," he cried, his voice hoarse and broken, echoing through the sudden, complete silence, "then take mine first. Let the boy die quickly, without suffering." The executioner froze, his gaze darting to Hideyoshi, awaiting orders. This was not in the script. Such defiance was not supposed to happen. But Hideyoshi's face remained stony, inscrutable. He merely gave a slight nod. The execution must proceed. The chain creaked downwards, and now Goemon's feet touched the oil surface. It boiled. The effect was instantaneous, horrifying. His body arched in silent agony as the superheated liquid seared his skin like acid. Unbearable pain pierced every cell, but his hands remained motionless. He still held his son high above his head. The boy cried out, but it was impossible to tell if it was from terror or from the unbearable heat rising from below. They descended further. The chain slowly, link by link, moved downward. The oil reached Goemon's knees, then his waist, then his chest. Every inch was an eternity of pure, searing agony. Hot steam enveloped, suffocated him. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, acrid and nauseating. But his hands, they remained motionless, as if carved from stone. He still held his son above the lethal heat. The crowd watched in stunned, mournful silence. Some openly wept. Others turned away, unable to bear the sight. But all, absolutely all, understood. They were witnessing something unprecedented. A father's love, displayed in the most unthinkable, most extreme circumstances imaginable. The boiling oil reached Goemon's very neck. The heat seared, permeated every pore, draining his last strength. His hands, which moments ago had held his son with inhuman tenacity, began to tremble, and the boy, slick with steam and sweat, slowly slipped. For an instant, the world around him froze. No, He wouldn't allow it. Never. Instead of letting his son fall into the fiery abyss, Goemon did something that would forever be etched in the memory of everyone who witnessed this execution. With one swift, merciful motion, he plunged the child deep beneath the surface, pulling him down with him. A loud splash. The boy's cry, thin and desperate, abruptly cut off as the churning liquid closed over his head. A deafening silence. Instant death, not a slow, agonizing demise. Then, through plumes of acrid steam, through infernal pain, Goemon once again lifted his son's body high above his head. Hot flesh, burned black, yet he held him like a banner of defiance. His own life was fading, his body disintegrating under the assault of the fire, death already reaching with its skeletal fingers. But his grip on the child, whom he could not save from his fate, but spared from prolonged agony, remained unyielding. Only a rasp, a gurgle escaped his lungs. The last thing the crowd saw was Goemon's face, burned beyond recognition, distorted by pain, but in his eyes, not a trace of submission. His gaze, like a burning ember, fixed on Hideyoshi. Such concentrated, palpable hatred that those who stood closer swore. Later, they felt the air around them turn cold as ice. Then he slowly, majestically sank beneath the surface, taking his son with him. The churning surface of the cauldron closed over them, and the horrifying spectacle finally ended. Only the hiss of the oil and the suffocating scent of burning remained. The execution of Ishikawa Goemon and his son was intended to be a terrifying demonstration of the cost of defiance against authority. Hideyoshi intended it as a warning, a spectacle so gruesome that it would crush any thoughts of rebellion in the hearts of those who witnessed it. He wanted their blood to run cold. Instead, something entirely different happened. The image of a father sacrificing everything to protect his child, even in the face of death itself, resonated in the hearts of the common people in a way Hideyoshi could never have foreseen. He did not destroy Goemon's legacy. On the contrary, this execution transformed him from a notorious bandit into a folk hero of mythical proportions. The story spread throughout Japan like wildfire, growing new details, whispered from village to village. Goemon became not just a man, but a symbol, an embodiment of resistance to tyranny, of boundless love for family, of the eternal struggle between the powerful and the powerless. His death poem, secretly smuggled from his prison cell, became a kind of anthem for the downtrodden. Its words quietly resonated in the night's silence, offering hope and sowing the seeds of defiance. In the years that followed, through the whisper of bamboo groves and the whistle of wind in thatched roofs, his name, like a spark, flew across the land. Other thieves, other rebels, raised it like a banner in their hands. They appropriated his legacy, robbing the rich, whose treasuries overflowed with gold, and giving to the poor, whose stomachs cramped with hunger. Authorities, like birds of prey, hunted them down, seized them, threw them into cold dungeons where the air was thick with the scent of fear and dampness, and executed them. The clanking of chains, the dull thud of an axe, the cries of the crowd that died on their lips. These impostors perished, but it didn't matter. The idea of Goemon, like an indomitable spirit, broke through the stone of prison walls, becoming more powerful than the man himself. It lived on. The large cast-iron bath, with its heavy metal sides, came to be called a Goemon Bureau in his honor. A darkly ironic tribute. The instrument of his agonizing death, the boiling oil, transformed into a symbol of purification, renewal, into a warmth that embraced the body. Each time people, weary from the day's toil, immersed themselves in the hot, steam-enveloped water, they involuntarily remembered. Their skin felt the heat. Their eyes saw the ghostly gleam of fire. They remembered the man whose flesh was burned in boiling oil for a crime that was simply this: he loved justice more than his own life. The scent of steam, mingled with the smell of old wood and smoke, lingered in the air, and in it, echoes of ancient suffering seemed to dissolve. Kabuki theaters, with their vibrant colors, rustling silks, and booming drums, immortalized his story. For centuries, they drew crowds whose gasps and laughter filled the halls as his exploits were reenacted on stage. Artists with steady hands depicted him on paper, endowing him with superhuman strength, capable of feats beyond mortal man. Every line, every brushstroke conveyed a power that transcended the ordinary. Writers, delving into fantasy, created novels about his adventures, each more fantastical than the last, carrying the reader into a world where the hero could do anything. The rustle of pages, the scratch of quills, invisible ink seeping into minds. But perhaps Ishikawa Goemon's most enduring legacy is the question that his life and death, like two sharp blades, pose to every generation. In a world where power, like a heavy burden, is concentrated in the hands of a few, where the rich, whose pockets burst with gold, grow even richer while the poor, whose hands tremble with weakness, struggle for survival. What is the right answer? Submission to power that presses down like a stone, or rebellion in the name of justice that blazes like fire? Goemon chose rebellion. This choice cost him everything. He lost his life, but gained something that Hideyoshi, for all his power, for all his wealth, could never possess. He gained immortality. He lives in the hearts and minds of people, as an echo of courage, as an eternal memory that knows no oblivion. 4 centuries, like 4 breaths of time, have passed since Ishikawa Goemon and his son perished in that boiling cauldron. But the questions their deaths raise remain as sharp, as relevant today, as they were in 1594. The world has changed beyond recognition. We possess technologies that would seem like magic to the people of the Sengoku period, the cold gleam of screens, the hum of unseen machines. We have governments that claim to represent the will of the people, legal systems that promise justice for all. Nevertheless, the fundamental inequalities, the very ones that drove Goemon to rebellion, persist. The rich still grow richer, their hands reaching for new gains, while the poor struggle for survival, their stomachs cramping with hunger. Powerful individuals still evade the consequences of their actions, their voices ringing loudly, while the powerless suffer for crimes they did not commit, their cries drowning in silence. The machinery of oppression has become more sophisticated, its gears turning silently, but it has not disappeared. Its invisible chains still shackle the weak. The legend of Goemon is not just an echo from dusty pages. It lives, it breathes. Like a sharp whisper piercing the silence, it reminds us that there are moments when the weight of state laws presses on the chest, entering into a dull, unbearable conflict with the thin yet resonant string of conscience. Moments when the demand for justice becomes a searing fire, burning from within, compelling one to risk everything that is dear. And every such choice, every such flame, leaves behind an unbearable, ashen taste of the price. His rebellion is not just a story, it is a cry that cost him the air in his lungs, the warmth of his hearth, the phantom image of the world he so desperately tried to forge, and his son. Oh, his son, his small, defenseless son. He became a cold, silent echo of his father's choice, an innocent victim of a battle he was never called to, where he couldn't even raise a fist, only to watch the light fade. And so, an image emerges, not just a picture, but a searing imprint on memory. The iron cauldron boils, steam scalds the lungs, and he, Goemon, lifts his boy above his head. Do you hear it? That faint, dying gasp of the child. Do you feel it? How his small body grows heavier, colder in his father's arms. But even as his own life drains through his pores, as acrid steam clouds his eyes, he does not break. He looks directly into the faces of the executioners. His gaze is a defiance, silent yet shaking the air, making them flinch. This image is an unbearable, deafening symbol, a symbol of what love is capable of when it is torn apart, and of the bottomless chasm of loss that remains. It whispers to us of what we are capable of when our soul is pure, and what we are willing to sacrifice when conviction becomes the only air. And perhaps it is in this unbearable, searing clash, that Ishikawa Goemon's true, unyielding legacy lies. Not in the jingle of stolen coins, not in the thunder of rebellion. No. It is a whisper that in this world there are things worth dying for, that the greatest tragedies are born not of malice, but of a dull, grinding collision between a tender, protective love that yearns to shelter those who are dear, and a harsh, merciless demand for justice that compels one to fight for truth, even if that fight tears the soul apart. The man whose flesh boiled in iron alongside his son's ceased to be merely a name from ancient chronicles. He became something more. He became a cold, merciless mirror in which each of us, looking deep, can see our own soul, feel its tremor. He became a question, a dull, insistent one that pounds in the temples of each new generation. Faced with injustice, with that sticky, suffocating sensation of oppression, will we bow our heads, tasting dust on our lips, or raise a fist, even if it trembles with fear? And if we dare to resist, if that inner fire ignites, are we ready to feel the full weight, the full pain of that price? That iron cauldron that consumed them has long since cooled. Its metal is cold to the touch, silent. But the fire, that raging, scorching fire that led Ishikawa Goemon to his death, continues to burn. It does not die out. It waits for the next one brave enough to feel its heat, or foolish enough to raise the banner he left behind. And in the quiet, pre-dawn hours, when the world stills, when even the wind dies down, and the powerful of this world sleep in their soft, warm beds, some say, yes, some whisper that through the centuries you can still hear it, an echo, a reverberation of a father's love, a pure, piercing sound, undaunted, unbroken, eternal. It vibrates in the air like an invisible string, refusing to let you sleep.